Hi, good evening. I want to presume this is working. Thanks for being here for the daily discourse. It's for me a nice way to spend this time. So again, thank you for being here. For anyone new, every evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, there's a discourse on some sort of spiritual topic or Bible study. If there's any specific topic, don't hesitate to ask, and it can be addressed in days forthcoming. Last night was on prayer, and while it stayed somewhat on the surface, I was hoping to delve into a few points a little deeper. However, received a question, and I feel more obligated to speak towards that. The question was, hang on, this really feels like the earth is punishing us for how much damage we've done. What do you think is happening? So this in regard to, towards it in that regard. I mean no disrespect in doing so. It's just simpler for me to do as best I can. And it's either way, right? It's incredibly clear that humanity as a whole needs to shift its focus in life. We can interpret the current events as a sign of all of this, but it doesn't change the point that this is where we are right now. We cannot wait for things to get better, because they won't get better, they will get different. And it's hard to hold the present up against this idea of what the past was. Things will get better inevitably, but Lord willing, but we must adapt to the changing tides of the times. In expecting to return to the past, how things were, we're constantly living in comparison with what the present is. And this mindset in any circumstance has the potential to make the present seem very miserable. And it's not exactly sustainable long term. And by that I mean that we need to take this time to really seek change in our lives as individuals. And it's so easy just to remark on what's going on, but how can you radically change yourself, right? What can be done to alter our way of living and thinking so that we can redirect our own movement towards change? My own opinion, which I say humbly, is that this is a massive wake-up call, that things cannot continue the way they have been with this, and Lord willing, when all of this passes, it does not mean that we can return to life the way it was going. It means that we have to embrace this movement away from what was. And this requires self-discipline and sacrifice and self-denial, which nobody wants to hear, but it is incredibly important, letting go of habits and mindsets that are not beneficial. There's general momentum or current to life, and all we can really control, for the most part, is how we react to it. And the reality for many right now is not as expected. Somebody wiser than myself once said that acceptance is the best way through something. This is, for many of us, a time to pause. And again, those of us that have that luxury, at the very least, should be spending time in deep and sincere prayer for those that don't have the luxury of pausing right now. We must sincerely pray for those that need our prayers. I mean, a possible gift of all of this is the opportunity to restructure our lives and priorities. It's important to reflect on the way the world is going and how we can use this time to reshape our lives. This is another thing that looks different for everybody, but regardless, change involves letting go of the past, accepting the present, and moving towards the future, however that may look. Learn to live more compassionately and in union with one another. Again, this manifests differently for everybody. Everybody has different things to work through and to let go of, but we must begin that process or continue that process or focus more on that process. It's a balancing act between that and not losing sight of the simple beauties and blessings that we have, although the two do run together. So try and keep them at the forefront day to day as much as we can. And more than anything else, turn to prayer. Deepen your faith, develop your relationship with God. This is the most transformative thing that we can do as individuals. There's nothing greater than this. Live life for eternity in the next. And in doing so, there's this natural development of appreciation for every day that we have. We have to pray and trust in God, do all that we can to open ourselves to His love and mercy, pray for the world and pray for one another. More directly, to address the original question, right? I imagine a lot of people would share that same exact sentiment, that it feels like the world is falling apart, and that it feels like punishment for something or everything that humanity has done wrong. I don't want to dissuade you from feeling that way, but I also don't want to encourage it either. I try not to get stuck in that place, but rather use it as fuel for your individual growth, away from the things that you see as problematic as a whole, or as yourself, be it getting stuck in a mindset or seeing a greater need for recycling, and so recycle more. See what it is that makes you feel a way, and do what you can. Use it as motivation to a bigger change, and a change on a more personal level, thus a greater level. I can only resort to scripture and saying that God is full of love and mercy and compassion, regardless of that aforementioned sentiment. And perhaps a major step in all of this is turning back to God and asking for forgiveness rather than just taking it as a given. We must repent on all the wrongs of our lives, and thus the wrongs of the world. It starts on this smaller level and grows bigger. It inevitably will lead towards change, again small, to the bigger individual, and thus communal. I often reference the story The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. If you permit me, I'll read it very quickly. I have it with me. I don't have many things on my desk, but it's so small that how could I not? And if you're familiar with this story, forgive me for being redundant, but it's a classic. So The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. It goes like this. Font is very small. In the light of the moon, on a little egg, struggling with this. In the light of the moon, a little egg lay on a leaf. One Sunday morning, in the warm sun came up, and pop, out of the egg came a tiny and very hungry caterpillar. On Monday, he ate through one apple, but he was still hungry. On Tuesday, he ate through 2 pears, but he was still hungry. On Wednesday, hungry. On Friday, he ate through 5 oranges, but he was still hungry. On Saturday, he ate through 1 piece of chocolate cake, 1 ice cream cone, 1 pickle, 1 slice of Swiss cheese, 1 slice of salami, 1 lollipop, 1 piece of cherry pie, 1 sausage, 1 cupcake, and 1 slice of watermelon. That night, he had a stomachache. The next day was Sunday again. The caterpillar ate through 1 nice green leaf, and after he had felt much better. Now he wasn't hungry anymore, and he wasn't a little caterpillar anymore. He was a big, fat caterpillar. He built a small house called a cocoon around himself. He stayed inside for more than 2 weeks. Then he nibbled a hole in the cocoon, pushed his way out, and he was a beautiful butterfly. The end. I think I missed a line in there, but so sorry for doing it injustice. But I like this story because it has a lot of things in it worth mentioning, but staying relevant to this, right? Perhaps this is the moment where we must cocoon ourselves in order to reflect on the miracle of metamorphosis that occurs. So if we look at the cocoon state, right, we often see it as this miraculous occurrence, but inside that time, inside that shell, right, the caterpillar's form is undergoing fasting, and it's being physically reconstructed so it can share its transformed beauty as a butterfly. There's so many other things in this story I would love to mention, but maybe not relevant for right now. But perhaps another talk, we can talk about it again. And this can be seen, the same idea, the same concept can be seen in scripture as well with the prodigal son. If you're not familiar with the story, the parable tells of a young man who, in his arrogance, he leaves his father, squanders his inheritance, and is left in ruin. And it's pride that brought him to this turning point of humility, and he realizes his errors, and he goes to return to seek forgiveness and thus a new life. we have to, as much as we can, let go of pride and seek that humility in order to return to our Father, again, as individuals and thus communally. Very similar to the cocoon, though, before the young man was celebrated for returning, he underwent this presumably long journey back. I imagine it must have been a time of very intense self-reflection and sorrow and mourning, and perhaps fear to see his father again. And I relate that with that cocoon period of hermitage, of self-reflection, of solitude. And that's kind of where we have this big change for the butterfly, or for this young man who he returns for a celebration because his father rejoices, saying the boy was dead and it's alive again, and was lost and is found. I imagine the analogy holds true for this time as well. Perhaps we are in the cocoon, and if we don't make the best of it and open ourselves up to the idea of radical transformation, it might be harder in the future. It might make things more difficult. But as individuals, it's very important to self-reflect, meditate, and pray. We have to turn towards God with humility and hope for the grace to transform our lives. Thus, we can inspire other people to do the same, to live by example, but not for example's sake. Ideally, pray and meditate each day, but especially now, the world needs prayers. This is a good time to make it a daily routine, to set aside things that, again, are not benefiting us or not benefiting the world, and replace those routines with other things like praying and meditating. From a Christian perspective, if you look at the timing of all of this, it's occurring during the season of Lent, which is a time of self-reflection, prayer, and fasting for the glorious season of Easter, a time of rebirth and new life. And so it seems relevant. And in context of something else, Thomas Merton once said, "How can you make sense of this thing if there isn't a God?" And I feel very similar about this as well. How else can you make sense of all of this? I know that's sort of a wordier response than necessary. So to put it very simply, wherever you are, no matter what is going on, regardless of what you might be going through, everything is going to be okay. When we put our faith in God, everything is going to be okay. It's easy for me to say. I can't imagine some of the sufferings that people are going through, but it's with humility that I feel obligated to mention that, however it might resonate to whoever is listening. We have to work on everything that we can to improve ourselves, to become the best versions of ourselves that we can possibly be the best version of you that you can possibly be. Change is a process, but it begins with the first step. If you have time to pray, pray for everyone that is suffering. Pray for everyone that is out there working tirelessly for those that are suffering. We can each do our part to grow in love and compassion and empathy. Pope Francis said that our behavior has an impact on others' life, and we have to think of this often. So please, I encourage you to pray and find the humility in your heart to turn towards God, who will guide you. Put your faith and trust in Him. I hope that this helps somewhat. So God bless you, and until tomorrow, thank you so much for listening.